Yo.
Hey, Max. Hey, you know what? You studied theater, right? And playwright in school.
Yeah, true.
At NYU.
Yeah.
And the thing I want to ask you is we're talking about the theater of the absurd, and in our case on Orange Pill Podcast, the theater of the monetary absurd.
Great.
So,
what's on your mind?
Do you know the theater of the absurd?
Of course.
Right. Well, I encapsulate it in this tweet here. America is a total goofball nation as its pie shrinks and as purpose and meaning breaks down. The blue check class are characters straight out of the theater of the absurd. In the end, there will be only silence. And I have that pretty amazing meme there, the gif of the absurd cow walking on its udders. But, you know, for the audience, so we're all on the same page here, I want to read the Wikipedia on what the theater of the absurd is and how it might relate to today and the monetary situation, which has led to Bitcoin and hyper-Bitcoinization. And that is the theater of the absurd is a post-World War II designation for particular plays of absurdist fiction written by a number of primarily European playwrights in the late 1950s. The plays focus largely on ideas of existentialism and express what happens when human existence lacks meaning or purpose and communication breaks down. The structure of the plays is typically a round shape, with the finishing point the same as the starting point. Logical construction and argument give way to irrational and illogical speech, and to the human and to the ultimate conclusion, silence. So, you know, that round circle, we started 50 years ago, August 15th, 1971. Here we are 50 years later, back to August 15th, 2021. And the absurdity gets crazier and crazier. The illogicality gets crazier and crazier. You tune into the theater, in this case, is the public sphere, the public domain as played out on the cable news, which is more and more absurd, where it names words, these sort of things that used to be our sort of common bond, how we communicated the world around us and understood together the world around us. Like, words don't make any sense anymore. Money makes no sense. And money is the ultimate word.
Right. There's a certain inevitability. So it finishes where it starts off. Everything in between is doesn't matter, because you're always going to end up where you started. So there's a certain inevitability to it. There's a fatalism to it. And it's different than, let's say, surrealism in that it doesn't try to bend reality. It tries to kind of, absurdism really tries to flesh out a truer nature of reality. There's a great absurdist novel that we had during the 1960s, I guess it would be Catch-22. So a lot of people I see quoting Catch-22 these days, that there's a certain inevitability to the absurdity of war. We're just ending an absurd war, obviously, in Afghanistan. And a lot of the catchphrases from Catch-22, which was the absurdity of World War II, being repeated. There's a certain absurd quality to our lives, and it is comical in that sense. As you talk about juxtaposition a lot, comedy is essentially juxtaposition that jars your mind, and the way you resolve that jarring of the mind is through laughter. So laughter fills in the gap in your mind where these two juxtaposing ideas or images suddenly appear in the form of this joke, which is a construction of discontinuous imagery juxtaposition, wherein there is at least one thread of connection, so we are living in absurdist times, and for sure, and the absurdity of it, again, it goes to show the role of the artist in society to try to fill in the gaps, to give us some connection, to give us some to relieve some of the anxiety that comes with living in a very absurd time as we're living in now. And when I see images of New York breaking down in real time, it's flooding, it's crashing. There's a flood of 20-year-olds moving into New York City right now, and so there's about to be a major art movement like we haven't seen in 45 years in New York. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. If you can stomach it, that's the thing. You got to be in your 20s to be able to withstand the hardships of living in a decrepit, broken down New York City. But I feel the energy coming for sure. So
back to the theater of the absurd is, it was basically ultimately about liberation rather than despair, right? And it was kind of based on existentialism, which is all about despair, right? The nothingness of existence, where at least the liberation comes from understanding the absurdity of trying to control anything. And, at these end points, and you could look at World War II as a fourth turning and look at the four generations that made up that block, that was the disintegration of the structure and order of a world, which was all about, big imperial powers. So you had like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you had the Ottoman Empire, you had the British Empire, and those were starting to disintegrate. The entropy was hitting those, and they were that structure and order to the global society was starting to disintegrate, at least in most of the West. And then the more power went down to the nation state level, and ended and culminated with the end of World War II. Obviously, World War I and World War II, just the horror and the absurdity of the what happened is what led to this absurdist movement. Ionescu is probably one of the most famous of them. Jean Genet in Paris, in France, we've talked about him. And they said, though although the term is applied to a wide range of plays, some characteristics coincide in many of the plays. Broad comedy, often similar to vaudeville, mixed with horrific or tragic images. Characters caught in hopeless situations, forced to do repetitive or meaningless actions. Dialogue full of cliches, wordplay, and nonsense. Plots that are cyclical or absurdly expansive, either a parody or dismissal of realism and the concept of the well-made play. Again, like I bring you back to not only cable news, but FOMC meetings and their, press conferences. There's sort of a repetitive absurdist nature to this notion of these little guys or women, like Janet Yellen's this tiny little woman, Jay Powell's this tiny little dude, like trying to control the forces of the millions, tens of millions of people that make up the American economy, or the billions that make up the global economy. The absurdity of trying to control not only the organizing of it, but the decay of it, like trying to stop the decay with their money printing. This is what I'm saying. We live in, everything is kind of like an absurdist play at this moment, and we can only laugh. We laugh here.
Yeah, it's released through laughter, the comedy of absurdism versus, tragedy, where you're kind of stuck in the tragic. There is no escape. Absurdism gives you a path to escapism. So I guess to escape. So I guess it's similar to Bitcoin in that way, in that, a lot of people see Bitcoin. They don't understand that it's the path out of the tragedy, of the of the quicksand, but it is. So I guess it is on the same frequency.
And I wrote here some notes about this, is that we have the 50 years of fiat. So that cycle, we're coming full circle. And on exactly the same date, we arrive at the same point on a Sunday. Also, it happens to be on a Sunday, August 15th. And the silence, of course, is met with the silence. You know, the American Empire ended in Afghanistan right there on August 15th, 2021. And it's a weird repetitive nature to it, right? Like, why do so many empires go there to die? We've talked about that. But met with the silence of this man with coal black dementia eyes. Like, it's just,
Right.
that's the silence. But the 50 years of fiat ends in the silence of the black hole of Bitcoin, right? Black holes there's, sound can't escape, right? There's no sound because it's just like absorbing everything, light, sound, everything. And it's just the silence of an amazing force just pulling in all.
Mm-hmm. Well, so absurdist theater, as you point out, it's big in the 50s in Europe, because they lost World War II.
Yes.
So in America, of course, you don't have absurdist theater. You have American Graffiti. It's a great film about America in the 50s, the winner of World War II, and the confidence of that boomer generation that won essentially World War II, and they're the kids of the boomers, and how they became the American century. So we didn't really have absurdism here in the United States. We had self-assured kind of rah-rah patriot. It was a different, but in Europe, of course, they lost. And so they went absurd. They went to an absurdist abstraction because they couldn't, that's where they had to go with it.
Well, the artists had to go to absurdism to explain what they witnessed and saw over the previous 40 years, 50 years. And the same here is we're at the point of this, but we have no philosophers, we have no artists, we have Bitcoiners, and they're making sense of the previous 50 years. If you tune into cable news, like I said, if you tune into an FOMC meeting, if you read the meetings notes, like that is the absurdity, and they are the absurdity in terms of these cycles of let's look at how absurd they are. Okay. Central banks say they're controlling all, right? They're trying to do good, they say, with they're turning the little levers and the buttons and the dials of the global monetary system, and we see the rich get richer and rates go lower. Maybe it's not about demographics after all. Well, of course, Max especially has pointed this out for about 10 years now, that they're causing the deflation. The central banks are causing, the low rates are causing this strife. And what this article in the FT, this guy is looking at the actual Fed and what their report puts out, that the Fed Chair Jay Powell's speech was boring, yes, but 3 academics redeemed the proceedings at the Jackson Hole meeting last week by presenting a paper investors will do well to read. They argued that the primary force driving down interest rates is not demographic change, i.e. the boomers retiring, but income inequality. This is important for investors because the demographic trend that has in theory put pressure on rates is set to reverse, i.e. the boomers are dying off, while the trend towards greater income inequality looks like it's locked in place. So as we've said, and what the paper now points out with all their data, is that the actual vast savings and the decline in velocity of money is because the rich have so much money that they can't possibly spend it. So they become the lenders to government, the lenders to the bottom 99.9%. and sucking up more capital that is paid in interest expense, even at that tiny rate to them, but they can't spend it. So it doesn't ever recycle back into the economy, and thus drives rates down even further, driving up asset prices, making them richer. And they're stuck in a doom loop, like a bad Beckett play.
Right. The lie is that interest rates are near 2% and they can't figure out why there's inflation, because the average interest rate for the average person is a credit card interest rate, which is 18% or higher. And that hasn't changed in 10 years. And that shows that's highly inflationary. 18%. That was higher than what Paul Volcker was charging back at the height of wipeout inflation now in 1980. So they just simply don't look at the inflation that is credit card debt or payday loan debt or student debt or all these other forms of debt that are impacting people's lives in a highly inflationary way, as you point out, because the people lending that money to them are actually profiteers and private organizations, private banks, and that are predatory. This is what I call interest rate apartheid, that they're predating. It's predatory lending practices by one class onto the lower class, the permanent underclass, and they're making that divide wider. So, okay, now you have a couple of economists that are saying, you know what, the Kaiser report's been right for 10, 15 years. This is exactly the problem. And I think that the reason they're saying it now is not because they just figured it out, but because they feel safe saying it now, because they're about to go into the reset mode. So they're going to say the reason for the reset is because of this horrible situation we created with interest rates. We're not actually curing the problem that was causing the problem. We just figured it out. Wink, wink. And by the way, to get rid of it, we're going to reset. And to reset, they're going to roll out, as we point, what we're seeing in Australia. Australia is on the cutting edge of the global reset. They're combining your bank account with a biometric ID that's tied to a subscription to a vaccine, right? So they're creating that's the reset. It's happening in Australia. And it's kind of happening in other countries as well. So as we get in, and the reason they'll say that Australia ultimately will justify this reset is because they'll say, well, 40 years of interest rate policy was actually causing the problem. As Max and Kaiser was saying, it didn't solve the problem. So we have to do this big reset because there's no way to go back in time, and nobody could have predicted it. And it's just unsolvable. Meanwhile, the people in Australia who are protesting against this dystopian, draconian, invasive nightmare, they need to focus their attention on the Australian central bank. Okay, Australia has a central bank. That's the basis of all the problems in Australia, just like they're the basis of all the problems everywhere in the world. If you're going to go out and demonstrate, don't demonstrate against the media. Don't demonstrate against the government. Go to the central bank, wherever it is. There's a headquarters there somewhere, and go protest the Australian central bank. And nothing's going to get better until you close the Australian central bank. Do what El Salvador has done. They've outsourced their monetary policy to Bitcoin. And now that economy is going to thrive. The Gini coefficient is going to collapse, and you're going to have a lot more egalitarianism. Purchasing power is going to go up. GDP is going to explode. El Salvador gets it. Okay. Australia is diametrically opposite. It's driving their population into utter chaos and serfdom.
So again, the theater of the absurd and the characters doing like absurd things over and over and over again, where the audience could see the absurdity of their situation, but they keep repeating it, right? So they look at the Fed data going back to 1950, and what they see is it's not what the mainstream media tries to tell you is the situation that is happening. They say boomers are great, and what is the problem is that the millennials and Generation Z, the Zoomers, they eat too much avocado toast. And if they only cut back on avocado toast, all would be okay. But what the data clearly shows is that it's not an intergenerational wealth gap. It's a wealth gap between all generations. And there's much more data supporting the fact that they show that the difference in savings rates are much greater within any given cohort than across age cohorts. That is, savings are building up faster because the rich are getting richer, not because the baby boomers are getting older. So the data shows that. And then what they say is the result, what this guy in the Financial Times argues is, again, something that sounds like, we said over 10 years ago. Inequality, in their view, is self-perpetuating, i.e. because of the absurdity of, as the data shows, since 1980, when interest rates were at a high and they keep on going lower, they show the exact inequality going the exact opposite way. So they show a direct correlation between interest rates and inequality, but we keep doing it. Yeah. And they keep saying, what do they say over and over and over? If you tune into CNN, if you tune into MSNBC, which are like more left-wing media, what they say is it's helping the poor people but it's not
No.
helping the poor people.
It's
The
hurting
data
poor
shows
people.
that.
Right. So as we've been saying for over a decade, money printing and lowering interest rates doesn't fight deflation. It causes deflation. Okay, that's the absurdist quality of this. It causes deflation. The bank says, as a matter of fact, the bank will say the reason why prices for groceries are going up so much and the price of energy is going up so much is because of deflation. That's an absurdist statement. And they say it over and over and over again. So that's absurdist theater, in that it's now part of a script that's being read by the players on cable news, saying the central bank's fighting deflation by lowering interest rates and by printing money, even though we know now conclusively after 10 years that it does the opposite. And there's a deterministic outcome. There's a fatal flaw. There's a fatalistic outcome. There's an inevitability that they are going to snap the society and cause a civil war. They're causing a civil war in America. There's going to be 2 or 3 states that band together, Texas and a couple of others, and they're going to say, that's it. We're creating our own bank. We're going to go on a Bitcoin standard. And that's it. We're leaving the United States. We're creating a new country.
Well, here's what the FT says, and it kind of agrees with you here. What they say is inequality, in the view of these economists, is self-perpetuating with a feedback loop running through low rates. Excess savings of the rich depress rates. Low rates push asset prices up. The rich get richer still. Many governments are engaging in monetary policies that, in all likelihood, make this flywheel turn faster. For how long are the people who sit outside this wealth machine, i.e., a majority of voters, going to tolerate this? This strikes me as even nastier than the intergenerational conflict you would expect if they are right that the old fighting to keep the social safety net in place at working age, people fighting against ever higher taxes.
Well, if you remember, when I was in Rotterdam like 4 or 5 years ago, and I was on stage screaming and doing a bit, poetry, slam poetry.
Yeah.
And at the conclusion was, you need to raise interest rates now, right? It's been clear now for years and years and years that given the current system, the way it works, and the flywheel is the central bank, and the job is to either lower or raise rates. That's the job of the central bank. The central bank is the difficulty adjustment of the fiat world.
Yes.
Right. So in the Bitcoin world, when all the miners left China, the difficulty adjustment went sharply down until it restored equilibrium. And now the difficulty adjustment and, the hash rate is starting to move higher, because that's it. And blocks never were interrupted every 10 minutes. So the system worked beautifully. It's the best monetary policy ever invented in the history of humankind. Now, in the fiat world, they have something called the central bank. And when you find that the asset prices, which is tantamount to inflation, is running at 20% a year, which is extraordinarily above any consensus view on what would be acceptable, the bank's job is to increase interest rates. That's what the bank does. Now, under Alan Greenspan, said, and then Bernanke and Yellen and Powell have picked up on it, and they agree, they went down the same path, that the central bank has only one job, and that is to clean up the mess after crashes. That's what he has said, and that's what they believe. They don't believe that they are proactive in any way. They don't consider the full employment or the price stability mandates either. They don't respect those two. They only look at one thing. They only react with crashes, and they only have one tool: print more money. Mm-hmm. And by the way, printing all that money causes the crashes. So that's the self-feeding loop that we find ourselves in, leading to civil war. But the central bank is not independent. It's at the point of least independence ever, with Janet Yellen, former central banker at Treasury, working with Jay Powell hand in glove. So it's not independent whatsoever. It's simply printing money to perpetuate the current wealth and income gap, to tease a civil war. Essentially, you've got the quintillionaires in America that have thrown down the gloves, to use a hockey analogy, and said, we're ready to fight. Texas and Wyoming, we're ready. we're not going to stop until you start fighting back.
Bitcoin is at this point inevitable. It's destiny, it's fate, it's happening. There's no stopping it. Just like you can't stop a black hole. No matter how much light or matter or stuff you throw into the black hole, it's going to keep on sucking until it's ready, to end it all, the silence. But in terms of, what the Fed keeps on, the Fed, it was an experiment for 50 years, right? The US tried an amazing experiment. It did some amazing things, but at the end of the day, the flaw at the bottom of the whole thing was the absurdity of it. That the absurdity of life, right? Of humans thinking that they can control any outcome more than, a deer running across the lawn. Like, it's just the absurdity of thinking you can control it. Now, we're at the end of that. The 5,000 shitcoins are kind of an extension to try to do a quick, a condensed version of the 50-year experiment that empowered and enriched some people at the expense of everybody else. They're trying to do that really fast before hyper Bitcoinization sucks all in, including their fraudulent schemes. But again, remember this whole thing, the last sentence of that wiki, logical construction and argument give way to irrational and illogical speech, and to the ultimate conclusion, silence. And the ultimate conclusion is collapse. The silence is collapse, right? It just it's all noise. It's all like CNBC cheering, buy, 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 buy. The market floor, the traders shouting, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. And then it's just silence, right? Just dead, nothingness.
There's nothing more prevalent in the multiverse than silence. When you think about the vast expanse of space, and then when you think about even the matter that we encounter daily here, is 99% empty space.
Definitely in here.
Made up of atoms and molecules that are mostly empty space. So we come from nothing. We live in effectively nothing. We're 99.9 to the ninth degree nothing. Well,
that's the theater of the absurd. That's the argument that they're making. And you might as well laugh about it. That's the only way to survive it without despair. But, this is a good moment to not despair, but go to the Zoomer. This is a fourth turning into the next bit of this episode of Orange Pill Podcast.
All righty, time to talk with special guests. On Twitter, I follow people. I start to follow people, and before I know it, I am totally addicted to their Twitter stream because they're pumping out such great stuff. So let's talk to Dylan LeClair. He provides on-chain analysis and is the co-founder of 21stCenturyParadigm.com, as well as the author of Deep Dive newsletter published at Bitcoin Magazine. Dylan, how you doing?
Hey, guys. Hey, Max. Hey, Stacy. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
All right.
Hey, well, we're so excited. Max and I are kind of been around for a while, and we just love having all of the young people like yourself and William Clemente just landing in Bitcoin and just getting it so hard and deep. It's amazing to watch. In terms of this 21st paradigm.com, which you run, I want to start with something you say on there, and then we'll get deep dive. We're going to have to early get into number go up technology, though, because I know everybody in the audience wants a price. But let's first start with, you say fix the money, fix the world, and then state that, quote, we hold a fundamental belief at 21st Paradigm that the primary driver of wealth in the 21st century will not be what one does for a living, but rather how early one adopts Bitcoin as a primary store of value and unit of account for economic calculations. So let's start with that. And are we still early?
Yeah, of course we're still early. I mean, I can't imagine how you guys felt, back in the day. And honestly, people like you two and everyone else that was kind of an earlier adopter has made it super easy for me or just anybody to come in and just fall down the rabbit hole super hard. I think that process is just continuing to be expedited, right? You have people that, like Sailor, or people that kind of fall down the rabbit hole in record time nowadays. I think that's just getting quicker. But yeah, I mean, in terms of 21st paradigm and that statement, I think that was something that I realized in 2020. I had been dabbling in Bitcoin, and like I was studying finance at school my freshman year, and I think like COVID kind of changed everything. At least my perspective. It was like a red pill and an orange pill at the same time, and so I dropped out and I took just a regular like construction job, nothing to brag home about, but I kind of realized like the opportunity cost of everything was Bitcoin. I tweeted that out today, but I believe that, and so I started using Bitcoin as my unit of account for economic calculation, and then kind of realized that there's this one-time opportunity during the monetization process of Bitcoin, of this new money, the best money the world has ever seen, that I can't let slip through my grasp. So that's how I think of things, and I think increasingly the world is going to have to think of things like that.
Right. And well, let's see. Jack Dorsey tweeted something out recently. Of course, he heads up Twitter and Square. And he was tweeting that he's not here to make money, he's here to fix money. So it echoes what you're saying here: fix the money, fix the world. So for those who are just joining us, what do you mean by fixing the money?
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty deep conversation, and probably something that would take a little bit longer than the 30 minutes we have here today. But I think like my generation, I think everyone, and especially in America in particular, is so caught up with red team versus blue team, bipartisan politics. They're at each other's necks, and I think when you kind of get down to first principles and peel back the onion, I guess when the money's corrupted, which it is today, the base layer of I guess communication and the coordination function of society, then everything else corrupts as well. And so, that was kind of a big realization for me, where I was trying to wrap my head around things with politics. Everybody, like I went to a very liberal school, I'm in a liberal state, in the state of Vermont. Beautiful state. I love it here, but it's just that's this kind of perspective. And I was trying to wrap my head around things, right? And that realization that it's not about the actors or the puppets, but it's rather that there's this fundamental problem, and it's a huge problem. And so not only was Bitcoin kind of this financial asset, which I first kind of approached it from, like I was a finance, like economics major, like that's my interest, but rather Bitcoin was this thing that was like almost this self-correcting mechanism that humanity's kind of like veered off the wrong path. And now Bitcoin comes and fixes all these problems that a lot of people don't even know exist, because most people don't understand how the monetary system works, how the international monetary order works, how fractional reserve banking or central banking decays a society. And so I'll tell people fix the money, fix the world, and I'll say I'm a big Bitcoin guy, and they look at me like I have three eyes. But after 1,000 hours plus of reading and learning and listening to podcasts, that's kind of the conclusion I've arrived to.
We here on Orange Pill Podcast, we often talk about Bitcoin as a kind of black hole. It sucks everything in, including like the way people try to understand it. Just like a black hole absorbs all light, Bitcoin absorbs all metaphor, all history. Like you could describe it in almost any way, whatever your background is, whatever your experience in life is, like whatever your interest in history is, it absorbs all of it. Like it just sucks in all of it. So like when you're researching it, what are your interests in? Not only which metaphor works for you best when you're trying to understand Bitcoin, but also like what qualities of Bitcoin, like the network effect, the immutability, like what about it attracts you in particular?
Yeah, so like I kind of approached Bitcoin when I really started to dig deep, and I read like the Bitcoin Standard, and I had, I guess, like the digital gold framework, which is like pretty easy to understand, and it's like I mean most people like don't really know why gold's even valuable, right? Like it's a shiny rock, but that was kind of the first thing I approached it from, and then I realized that digital gold, the $10 trillion asset, that's like extremely bearish, and that Bitcoin is competing against basically the bond market and really all assets with a monetary premium. And then and then I kind of realized that having a global money, basically, yeah, like a coordination function in the digital age is going to, along with like the Jeff Booth thesis of technological deflation, kind of creating abundance, I realized that one Bitcoin is worth astronomical amounts of value. And, I'm 20 years old. I don't think it's possible to even put a number on how much Bitcoin is going to be worth, 30 years out, 40 years out, with how, exponential technology is going. And so, one Bitcoin is probably worth the tens of millions of dollars, the equivalent thereof, um, in today's purchasing power. And so, like, I guess when you're asking me how I approach it, I guess I started to approach it from an economics lens, and using it like I use Bitcoin as my unit of account. But it's fascinating when you have people like Michael Saylor, or people approaching it with like an engineering point of view, and they're saying like it's the first thermodynamically sound monetary network, and what in a world of entropy, approaching it from a lens of thermodynamics, like that blew my mind. And I'm no science like whiz kid, physicist, but still, like, that was like mind blowing for me. So there's so many ways to approach it, but that's probably how I think about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is exciting. You're excited. I'm excited. Michael Saylor is exciting. He's been in it for 1 year. He says, as you point, he's got the engineering perspective. He brings so much to the table. And, he had been almost retired. He told me in Miami that he was going to hang it up, quit. He had been in it for 20 years, done what he had to do, made all the money he thought he was going to make. Now he pulled into the Bitcoin rabbit hole and started a whole new life. And as you point out there, you are, a young man. I think you just said you're 20 years old. Now, usually people who are 20 years old have what the older people call idealism. They say, oh, you're an idealist because you're young. But it seems like your generation who are getting into the Bitcoin rabbit hole are never going to have to give up their ideals.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nihilism out there, and it's something that it's just like it's hard to describe. You can't really, like, you can point your finger at one thing or the other, but like there's a lot of people without much hope, and so I stumbled into Bitcoin, for the like at first because I thought I wanted to be like rich. I mean, and not that I don't, but like I thought it was about the money at first, and seeing the like a number go up on the screen, that's kind of the speculative aspect was what drew me into the, I guess if you want to call it like the crypto space. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know what Bitcoin maximalism was or anything else. But after, I did a little bit of reading and kind of lurking on the sidelines on Twitter, not putting myself out there. I realized it was so much more. And like, when you're talking about Michael Saylor retiring, Michael Saylor's buying 100,000 Bitcoin, and he's not, I don't think he's doing it for like, the paper gains or to make money. He's doing it because he thinks it's the biggest idea of our time. And so like, I'm a Bitcoin evangelist, not because I want to like, pump my bags. Like people always say that. They're like, you just trying to like, shill Bitcoin to me. I'm like, dude, like, no offense, but like your $1,000, or like, even if you were a millionaire, like it's not pumping my bags for $1 trillion asset. Like I'm doing it because I care about you, because I've, came to the conclusion that this thing's an inevitability. So, with Bitcoin, like, yeah, I definitely am an idealist, but in this kind of crazy world we're living in, I couldn't imagine a world without it. I wouldn't have as much hope as I do today, that's for sure. Bitcoin's the one thing that I can trust in a world where trust seems to be eroding at quicker pace than ever.
Yeah, you mentioned entropy, and of course we're just past the 50th anniversary of the Nixon shock and the US going off the gold standard. And Generation Z, your generation, is exactly the same age that the boomers were when that happened. So the oldest of them were like 24, 25 at that time. And they were in early on that newborn experiment of all fiat world. They got first in on, whether you want to call it a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme. Nevertheless, the scheme has hit entropy and it's disintegrating everywhere. As we've seen over the past, basically since the financial crisis of 2008, we've seen that it's collapsing, right? And they're trying to keep the sandcastle up. But you were recently tweeting that we're in a final crack up boom of the fiat experiment. So you also see that as an experiment. So elaborate on this thesis and where we are at the end of a long-term debt cycle and how this relates to Bitcoin.
Yeah, the Ray Dalio kind of framework of, I mean, and his statements on Bitcoin are, they are what they are, but his framework on like long-term debt cycles are was like really big for me, and the fact that, like, you can only pull forward demand so much, and this happens in many boom and bust cycles. Like most people kind of can understand a recession, whether like, like, oh, there's good times and then there's bad. The business cycle, like, you don't have to be an economic expert to kind of, intuitively understand that. Um, but most people don't understand that there's long-term debt cycles, and like, people don't understand it because we've never lived through one, anyone on the planet. And so, we're kind of at the end of this, like, 70-80 year debt super cycle, as well as, we're 50 years into this fiat experiment. I like looking at, our monetary system, the Triton dilemma, all of that, like, because we're the world reserve currency, the self-correcting mechanism that happens, with balance of payments, and deficits and all of that, it's never corrected. So the U.S., like, we've basically, the middle class, the upper class, we've been living above our means for so long, kind of having this exorbitant privilege, and no one really knows that we've had it. And so now, the piper is going to have to be paid, and people aren't going to like it, but that's just, the reality of kicking the can down the road for so long. And so, I think that's coming, and the way to protect yourself is obviously, in my opinion, Bitcoin. But yeah, I think it's just kind of, it's slow. The house of cards is slowly collapsing. And if you're looking at it day to day, week to week, month to month, even, nothing seems to make sense. The world's so crazy. Like, all of this, like the pandemic, all of this stuff. Like, is COVID real? Yeah. But why is all of this, madness, lockdowns? Basically 2020 was a financial bailout masqueraded as a, like as a, recession, or as a, COVID bailout because of the lockdowns. Like, I think all of this stuff isn't a coincidence. And, the time of reckoning has come, at least in the next couple of years.
Right. All righty. So you've made a big study on chain analysis. So let's get into it. Let's get into your chain analysis. Explain a little bit by what you mean by chain analysis and what can it tell us?
Yeah, I think it's just pretty interesting to look at, with Bitcoin, with the blockchain. Even I don't love the word blockchain. I actually prefer time chain. But basically, Bitcoin is the first completely transparent, monetary network. And obviously, there's altcoins which you can do something similar, but we've never really had this sort of completely open. It's pseudonymous, but you can see all of the capital flows, and it's actually, I think it's pretty fascinating because we've never seen anything like that, 100% transparency. And so I've just been kind of following, like I don't trade. I'll speculate, here or there. I'm not a degenerate leverage trader, but just looking at, like the capital flows on the network, you can basically see over time, like hodling behavior and all of this stuff, which is super fascinating. And so, like, over the last 18 months, it's basically been like, especially after March 2020, you saw this like huge shift in hodling behavior, and a massive amount of coins becoming illiquid, basically being hodled. And that's happened over the course of, the Bitcoin network, obviously, as the price has gone from 0 to a trillion. But just kind of looking at the UTXOs and how they move, and the behavior of certain classes of investors, is something that I think is really fascinating. And it's kind of why even though I'm buying Bitcoin every day, regardless of what what UTXOs are moving or not. It's has me looking at all this data, has me extremely bullish for the next 2021, 2022, and onward.
So you talk about the cycles, and I just mentioned that you're Generation Z, and you also talked about the Triffin dilemma, exorbitant privilege. We also have the Cantillon effect. But what about this fourth turning, this notion of a fourth turning? So you're this new generation, Generation Z, coming on, and Max especially is always talking about how excited he is for Generation Z, because it does feel, do you feel as that fourth turning? You are the fourth turning, like you're that new generation coming on and overturning everything that came before it. I think the chaos that you talk about is partly that, the entropy of the boomer class. They're retiring, they're disintegrating literally and figuratively. Their pyramid scheme is disintegrating. And there's a sort of tension going on there. But we're at that point where the fourth turning's happening. And at the same time, Bitcoin was born right at the beginning of it, like in 2008 with the Chancellor on brink of 2009 with the Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks. So do you see hyper Bitcoinization happening? And what does it look like on chain and in the real world?
Yeah, I mean, so I haven't read the fourth turning, but I've heard it on a, like, the kind of the thesis on podcasts and stuff, and I find it super fascinating. I did read The Sovereign Individual, and that was like, it blew my mind that it was written in 1997, and that's kind of how I like, that was a big shift in my mindset and like how I see the world, in the sense that, like, all of these 19th 20th century institutions, and like the nation state and all this stuff that we kind of just accept as reality. We you accept as, like, just like, oh, central banks, oh, like, bipartisan politics, all this stuff that, like, people are just like, it's the norm, and because we were born in it. Like, there's that, like two fish are swimming side by side, and they look at each other, and then the fish comes up to them and is like, hey boys, how's the water? And they're like, what's water? And like, that's like what we're living in today, and all the madness of, just I think that the digital age, like Bitcoin, kind of marks that, 2009. I think that in history, looking back, 100 years from now, that will be kind of like the line in the sand. We had the internet, but, the internet of value and what that means for the world, and for people's sovereignty and just humanity in general. I think that's going to be a huge line in the sand. And so, that's kind of how I view all of this madness in the world. Is, I'm gonna do me. I'm gonna stack my UTXOs and mind my own business, and all the craziness that happens, that I can't control. Well, I'm just gonna let it play out and let the rest figure it out.
Right. So on the subject of millennials and Gen Z, so we were talking to American Hodl, who's on Twitter. He's a millennial.
Sometimes he's on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked him this question about this generational warfare between millennials and boomers. Boomers obviously took advantage of, as Stacy, was talking about, the Ponzi scheme of fiat money for the last few decades. And then he also said, well, the millennials are really about Bitcoin. The Gen Z, he talked down a little bit about Gen Z, that they were maybe not as clued into Bitcoin as the millennials. Here's your chance, Dylan, to set the record straight. Is he on target with that?
Yeah, I'm actually good buddies with American Hodl. I think there's something there. I think more so is just that, like, Gen Z. I don't know what the official, like, birth dates are, but for the most part, like, Gen Z is still late high school, in college, right? Like, college, you're kind of in this like fantasy land. Like, I dropped out, and it wasn't a money thing. Like, I got good grades, and my school wasn't too expensive, but I mean, and college, awesome. Like, I love it. The social life is great. Like, you're surrounded by 10,000 kids. Like, you have to do your work, but there's not much responsibility. I think, like, the proof of work aspect of the real world, that, that cold reality check, that will make you appreciate Bitcoin more. And so, you kind of have, like, I said there was, like, Zoomers have kind of this, like, nihilistic view on the world. And I think that kind of, it's also true for, like, like the financial markets. It's like, I'm going to put my entire net worth into GME calls, and we'll see what happens. Like, that's kind of like the same sort of mindset. And so, I think Zoomers, there's some based Zoomers. There's some Zoomers that can see through all the craziness of the world, and there's definitely a lot of stackers. But for the most part, it's still kind of in this bubble, and a lot of the Zoomers haven't hit the real world. And I'm not saying I have, but once you kind of get out of school and you get a reality check, I think Bitcoin will be appreciated a little bit more.
Sure, I see a lot of articles about Zoomers and on Reddit forum boards and gambling with Wall Street bets and stuff like that on these meme stocks. But they're also really into things like NFTs and flipping those and altcoins. So you have some writing on your website about altcoins versus Bitcoin. So why Bitcoin? Why Bitcoin and not the altcoins, where they might have more, number go up immediately right now, this day?
Yeah, I mean, it takes some humility to cut through all the noise and the hype cycles and to just stack sats. And when someone's flipping JPEGs and they make $1 million in the course of a week, that certainly can do some FOMO. And honestly, like, I'm not hating on those people. If you can flip a JPEG for $1 million, great, good on you. But understanding that Bitcoin is this one time creation, or maybe not creation, like, I would say discovery, that solved Byzantine generals' problem. It solved the double spend problem. It tied the physical world to the digital realm, and that's not something, that's not something that can be improved upon. Like I think just, a lot of people kind of condemn Bitcoin for not being able to do all the things that certain altcoins can do, or like on the base layer. And I think that's a totally like wrong way to look at things. Bitcoin is a perfected monetary system, and it does one thing. It enables you to store and transfer value natively over the internet. And that's all that money should be.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to conclude this very short interview with this amazing Zoomer here. And I think our hands, our future of Bitcoin is in good hands.
Yeah. We'll check in with Dylan LeClair again quickly, because things are moving rapidly at his place. Things are another 6 months, and he'll probably be running that entire state.
And I also want to ask finally, like just a quick number, because the audience needs to hear some number. I saw Fidelity predicting on their chart like a possible, I think it was $1 billion Bitcoin. So how high do you think it could go? What's your out of the world sort of crazy, chaotic sort of number?
Everything divided by 21 million. I don't know. I think in dollar terms, infinity, when fiat collapses, that's not, an if, but when. But in terms of purchasing power today, probably I would say in my lifetime, $15 to $20 million.
All right, that's cool. We'll be both buying for monsoon.
That'll buy a lot of avocado toast.
Yeah, a lot of avocado toast. Anyway, Dylan LeClair, thanks so much for being on the Orange Pill podcast. We'll have you back on again soon.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, that was definitely not absurd. That was so real.
Yeah, it's a really good insight into what's happening in the Gen Z and how Bitcoin is impacting this newest generation, really. And it's exciting, because they're not going to be hard to convince to accept a Bitcoin standard. So when the fiat money blows up and the central bank disappears and Bitcoin becomes the currency, they're already ready for it. Like they're just waiting for everyone else to get on board.
Yeah. And, speaking of absurd, I have another headline here. And, how that destiny can be like a positive, like that black hole of hyper Bitcoinization can be without coercion, right? It's without force and coercion. Is on the absurd side, we have the very absurd Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. He looks like he seems to dress himself intentionally as some sort of banana republic sort of dictator. He likes to look kind of comical. But there was a headline here: Belarus president urges citizens to mine Bitcoin rather than seek low-paying jobs overseas. This is pretty amazing, right? He was speaking to the employees of JSC Belaruskali, which is the largest producer of potash in the world. And he said that Belarusians should stay in the country and seek alternative sources of income, such as mining Bitcoin. Quote, create something with electricity, he said in a video posted by the Pool of the First Telegram channel. In the end, start mining cryptocurrency or whatever it's called. There is enough electricity in the country. So he thought that this was better than going overseas to be a low wage, agricultural worker, because the president adds that foreigners are only waiting for Belarusians to pick strawberries.
Yeah, no, that's great. He's right. So they have cheap electricity there. So it's the game theory kicks in on the sovereign level. As we've been saying, expect this to happen. You've got several sovereigns now involved. El Salvador is involved. Belarus is involved. They already have a big Bitcoin position. I forget exactly what the circumstances were, but the country has a bunch of Bitcoin. I'm sure now that there's going to be Bitcoin as adoption of legal tender in Belarus. And so now we'll have another region of the world that's going toward a hyper Bitcoinization. We've got Latin America. We've got other areas, right? So, it makes absolutely sense. Everybody at the end of the day, everybody has some good in them, and Bitcoin brings it out. So, and he can't coerce people, and he sees it like whatever. He came to the conclusion, Bitcoin got into his head, and he's like, actually this makes sense, and it's good for the people, and I'm actually, I'm fine with that. There's no reason not to be helping the people.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, his reign is over, right? That's it. There's a certain the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, there was an inevitability. They were collapsing. They were going to be gone. One of them could have stepped forward and say, hey, let's just end these empires and move down to a more decentralized nation state. And now we're at the process of moving down towards a city-state model today, or a more local community sort of model. But the fact is, somebody's going to step forward. It's not like this guy like Belarus is going to be, like it's a way for him to, Bitcoin is a money for enemies, right? And his enemy is the United States, essentially, and the Western economies. So this is a way for him to fight them, right? Because it's asymmetric warfare in his mind, that he knows he can't control his young population.
Yeah, no, whatever brings you to the table, that's fine. Everyone comes to Bitcoin who they are. And whether he thinks it's fighting against America or whatever, that's fine. It all comes to the same conclusion. You could be buying Bitcoin because you believe in the second coming of Christ. You could be buying Bitcoin because you believe it's a way to fight the American empire. It doesn't matter. It's all the good. It's open arms. We'll take everybody. Bring your whatever it is you think you're doing and just do it. And this is like I said. I mean, as I said, if Bitcoin were around 10 years earlier, we probably wouldn't have had 9/11, because the attackers, we know that whole 9/11 cost about $500,000, and there would have been a choice. Do we put 500,000 into Bitcoin, or do we do this extravagant thing in New York? And then be like, what? Actually, I'd rather put it in Bitcoin, and that would have been a totally different outcome in history. But fortunately, Bitcoin came around when it did come around. And, I think it'll prevent the next 9/11. It prevents terrorism, it prevents war, it prevents violence, because it monetizes peace, it monetizes love, it rewards altruism. So that's a gigantic shift of consciousness amongst human beings that's really been plaguing our species now for a million years, really. I mean, it's just the violence tendency is unnecessary at this point. And, so Bitcoin allows us to escape the violent. It gets us out of the absurdist theater of predetermined violent outcomes, and to see what happens in a more of a pure loving outcome. Like, we haven't explored that yet as a species. So and we're about to.
Yeah, because this 50-year experiment in fiat, part of the issue and part of the problem is that there's a Jay Powell, there's a Janet Yellen, there's a Ben Bernanke, there's an Alan Greenspan. And they are humans, and they have friends, they have family. You want to help your friends, you want to help your family. You feel bad for some, maybe not so bad for others. So, you're even whether or not you are consciously or subconsciously doing it, you make the wrong decision based on your priors, right? So it was always inevitable. It was inevitable that this absurd monetary experiment would collapse into an absurdist comedy of meaningless language, right? Words mean nothing anymore. It doesn't make any sense. Booming stock markets, right? All-time high stock markets. S&P 500 hits a new high every single day. Now look at the absurdity. Juxtapose the stock markets, juxtapose property markets to the lines of ships outside the harbors in Long Beach and Northern California. Look at the container prices for shipping tripling in the past year. Look at the shortages when you go to the shop. we just mentioned on the last microdose that, you know, when we went to the pharmacy, there's like, it's just total chaos because there are no employees there. Look at just juxtapose the reality through which the controllers and the command and controllers of this situation try to say, hey, look at the stock market, look at your property price, you're all feeling wealthy, right? And then you go out and it's total decay and chaos. It is like an apocalyptic scene of no workers anywhere, distress everywhere, you know, the deaths of despair, the insane stories
by design, right? So they're stealing, and it's going to lead to a civil war. That's what they're doing. I mean, the people that are stealing all the money are throwing the gauntlet down to the states that want to separate and saying, let's go to war. So there's going to be a war.
Vaudeville mixed with horrific or tragic images. That's absurdist theater. Vaudeville is cable news. Vaudeville is the stock
mixed
market.
with violent images, right? So
Yeah,
it's vaudeville.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, here's Afghanistan. Here's Kabul. Here's tragedy.
The two school shootings this week in North Carolina.
Right, we're gonna present that in an entertaining cable news show, selling, you know, adult diapers and donuts, and defense contractors with a perky, you know, gal behind the desk.
Characters caught in hopeless situations, forced to do repetitive or meaningless actions. Now we have every 6 months. Apparently, we're gonna have to renew our vaccine passports, right? That's a repetitive action every 6 months. This is a new cycle. You got to do this every 6 months. Got to get that shot. Got to get that shot. Got to get that shot. And you know, the meaninglessness of again, like here we have these small individual humans trying to control the market forces of billions of individuals on Earth. Here we are as well as these little humans trying to control this force of nature, which are these viruses that have been around a lot longer than we have already annihilated us many times in the past, and are way more clever than we are, even though they're tiny little, you know, very small, like seemingly simple code compared to us.
Oh yeah. Well, the virus origins, they finally figured it out. It was an accident of combining bat DNA with an Amazon Prime subscription. When you put those two together, you end up with COVID, which requires you to bundle your Amazon Prime subscription with the Pfizer vaccine. And that's what happened. It was the first subscription bio DNA splice virus.
So, but I think, however, you know, the fact is, while these absurdists were caught in this monetary absurdist theater, I think they were so wrapped up in their absurd story that I think they missed the beginning of a new play, which was Bitcoin. So I think they only came around, they only noticed it when the audience was like not looking at them anymore and instead looking over here at Bitcoin. And I think by then the network effect was way too big for them to do anything to stop it.
Yes, the evil queen. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror says, well, not you, bitch. It's actually Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
They're like, what the fuck? Bitcoin? I thought that was a joke. No. Bitcoin is now taking over and you're an old hag. Oh, fuck. Well, I better go try to poison it.
Well, that's why I think you know, as we pointed out, the absurdist theater of the 1950s in Europe happened after, like, we all agree, just atrocity, right? 50 years of atrocity. Here we've had 50 years of monetary atrocity. Many deaths of despair, many horrible things happened, but nothing to the sort of extent that you saw in the end of that last regime. So here the cycle of history is turning again, but Bitcoin has provided a more natural, peaceful way out. Like, I just think I think it's too late for them to get violent, right? It's too late, right? It's
No, they're going to convert and become hodlers.
Exactly.
Right. So they're gonna hodl, more hodlers inside the government, and more hodlers. More defense contractors will start to mine Bitcoin, and they won't be spending that money on building new weapons. The energy world is going to be mining Bitcoin. Belarus has figured, you know, we got cheap electricity, let's mine Bitcoin. Same thing in the Middle East. They're going to be like, whoa, we're sitting on all this oil. Let's go mine Bitcoin. Fuck the dollar. We don't need the dollar. We want Bitcoin. So it's just, it's all going to happen. And it's happening right now. So the guest was really on the cutting edge of this. I mean, this is the mindset. This is a 20-year-old who's now native to Bitcoin. They're not thinking anything. They cannot comprehend a world that's Bitcoin is not the unit of account. They don't get it. They wouldn't think about it. It doesn't make any sense. Just like, if you say that Copernicus, that the sun is actually at the center of the solar system and not planet Earth, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You can pretend like the Catholic Church did for a long time, but you cannot unsee that truth. Once you see Bitcoin, you cannot unsee Bitcoin.
I also like the fact, like, it dawned on me until we had some technical issues with Zoom, was having some technical issues in terms of being able to extend that interview any longer. But what dawned on me was that he's 20 years old. And when we first started talking about Bitcoin together on Kaiser Report, he was only 9.
Yeah, he was 9 years old.
Oh my God. Like that, just like, wow.
Right. When we started doing Kaiser Report, he was 6.
Oh
6 years old. So when we started doing content, he was 2 years old, 3 years old when we first started doing content. That could be our son.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It's just amazing. And, but the way, it's the opposite of absurdity. The absurd theater is over. The absurdity is over, right? Like, boomers are absurd. Generation X are absurd. I'm Generation X. The older millennials are absurd. This 50-year experiment in monetary policy, intervention in fiat is absurd. And now the Bitcoin singularity, it's so certain, right? The absurdity is over.
It's the theater of certainty. That play hasn't been written yet. It's the theater of certainty. There's a certain outcome every 10 minutes. Certainty. Haven't had certainty really like this ever in the history of our species. So this is a new consciousness, emerging global consciousness. It's new.
Right. Well, one thing that is very certain is that our sponsor, swanbitcoin.com/orange pill, is where I will be going to be stacking some sats this Sunday morning. Right there. Max likes to whip out his swan. That's like kind of theater of the absurd, right? Like,
when I have the swan nursing at my nipple, I think that's more theatrically of the absurd. Okay, Swanee, there you go.
Well, that's a lot of the cable news these days as well. Like, yeah.
Breastfeeding swans?
No, like, my friend Bloated Lesbian sent me an article about that abortion rights of men have abortions too. And I was like, oh my God.
Not in Texas.
Not in Texas.
No, it's not in Texas anymore. They just passed a new law.
Right. No, I mean, this is the theater of the absurd as the last days of fiat play out. The last days of empires, big empires across Europe played out in the horrors of World War I to World War II, the end of World War II. And the playwrights, that survived looked back and told the story of what happened. Like, we're telling it as it's happening live. Like, we don't have to wait until the aftermath. We're telling it live as the absurdity ends.
Yeah, well, part of the motivation of absurdity is to try to stop just stop the train from going any further. We're on this train to chaos. So I'm going to stick a big, into the wheel. I'm going to stop. So I'm going to claim all kinds of crazy biological impossibilities as a way to try to stop the train from moving forward, because we can't keep going down this path. I think that's the motivation of it. It is a fear that the train is heading off a cliff. So people are like, oh my God, you know what? I'm going to say something really absurd, and hopefully that'll stop things from continuing. And, well, I mean, that's where we're at. So I think the claims made by the absurdists are going to get increasingly more absurd. in an attempt to stop time from continuing to roll over. But, TikTok next block, nothing stops Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is going to take us away from all this madness as it's doing right now. And we just talked to the Gen Z, who's obviously totally confident that generation and going down that path is going to be fine.
They will be fine. TikTok next block. Time to end this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're probably going to do an early, we might do it tomorrow, Monday, Labor Day. We might do a microdose because, of course, Max and I have to pack, get ready to go away. We're going to Paris. If things don't become too absurd, right, that we're able to go to Paris, who knows? Like, everything is by the hour getting crazier and crazier. So we may be with you.
It does get crazier by the hour.
Yeah. Every single hour, there's something new that's crazy going on. Like, who knew this Australian law was going to be introduced?
Yeah, that's totally insane.
Even the likes of the Daily Beast and the Atlantic are saying, like, this is crazy.
But I think now we know what it was like back pre-World War II.
That's what I'm saying.
Things got intense by the hour. By the hour, they got more intense.
This is what I'm talking about. This is what we're talking about. This is the hyperinflation of absurdity. The hyperinflation of Weimar Germany can be applied to not only currency, but to absurdity, to the absurdity of the leaders. It's when the leaders lose control and they don't know what to do. They've just lost the will to lead. They've lost the will to make sense of what they have created.
Yeah, they only know that they get big fat paychecks and they know how to cash them. That's it. That's all they care about. That's all they know how to do. That's it.
Right. Well, anyway, thank you again for being with us on Orange Pill Podcast. Join our Telegram group, t.me/orange pill. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel because we need to get over 100,000, right? Because that puts us into the silver play mode and helps with the algorithm before the algorithm kills us, of course, the program. But, we always have Telegram, t.me/orange pill, and youtube.com/orange pill. Make sure to subscribe to it. Any last words, Max?
No, I think we've covered it. Except this is Ronnie O'Sullivan, the best snooker player in history. He gave this to me personally. I'm a big fan.
That's right. And remember, go stack some sats at swanbitcoin.com/orange pill. I hear tell that they're moving to just swan.com. They're going to be able to be swan.com pretty soon. So
that's good.
Look forward to that. Right.
Bye, y'all.
Wait. We need to do an absurd goodbye.
Okay.
Like the cow walking on its udders. We need to do.